my son actually took dual credit courses at the community college, and that was my first kind of experience with community colleges back around 2005 and 6.
This is In the Know with ACCT, the voice of community college leaders. I'm Jacob Bray. On this episode of In the Know, I spoke with Judge Jim Cooksey, trustee from Moberly Area Community College in Missouri and chair of the ACCT Board of Directors. Jim has an interesting story and life experience, and I think you'll enjoy getting to know him. He was also instrumental in developing this year's Congress theme, Improving the Lives of Entire Families. Registration is now open, as is the call for presentations. I'll include a link in the description of this episode. All right, I am here at the 2022 National Legislative Summit with Judge Cooksey. Judge, first question, how did you get interested in community colleges?
Well, Jacob, I grew up, just as I had previously stated in an article, in the shadow of our community college. Back then it was a junior college. My parents' home and our home was within 3 blocks of walking. And I went away to school, and then I came back, and my son actually took dual credit courses at the community college.
Oh, really?
Yes, and that was my first kind of experience with community colleges back around 2005 and 6 when he was taking dual credits, and he was able to assemble 32 dual credits while in high school, and therefore he was able to graduate from the community college in 1 year. And that really started my interest in what the community college can offer the students themselves at the high school level and in order to expedite their education. And so as 2009 came around, I was approached because there were a couple of trustees retiring in 2010. And so I was asked if I would be interested in coming on the board. And I said, yes, I would. Now, where I come from, we really don't hold elections. Our town is our taxing district is very small. It's only the city of Moberly.
Okay.
So when we just don't have elections very rarely. We have one this year for the first time in a long time because there's 2 spots and 3 people, myself and the vice chair, and some other individual filed. But so myself and I'm now vice chair John Cochran, we both came on the board at the same time in 2010.
So you do have somewhat of a unique background that is sort of forming your thinking about community colleges and how you're approaching your time as the board chair. What led you to become a judge?
Well, what led me to become a judge was I was 28 years old and my predecessor passed away. And it's at that point, my election is at the county level, and I was basically the only Republican attorney, and our family CPA was well connected within Governor Bond. He was a close friend of Governor Bond, and so they asked me if I'd be interested at 28, which is very young. But back then, the roles of the position were we had a senior judge and a junior judge, and there were a lot less of an impact. You know, there were very minor things you would do as a magistrate, and then became an associate circuit. So they asked me, and I got a call from Governor Bond, and honestly, that was in early 1984, in March, and with the election, I had to run in November. There had only been one Republican elected in that circuit since Reconstruction, and I'd only been married I got married on September 4th in '83, so. My wife and I, we decided we'd just campaign as hard as we could and see and we were running against a prosecuting attorney, a gentleman who had been a really successful prosecuting attorney for several years, and he had given up that position a couple of years before, but he saw his opportunity. And we campaigned very, very diligently, and we actually won 55-45.
That's a pretty big spread.
Yes, sir. That's a big spread. And so we won, and therefore I stayed on the bench almost 20 years, and then I left the bench and went back to private practice.
Okay.
And so then in 2017, basically, the judge that was there had retired, and she was mandatorily retiring.
Okay.
So I was again approached about coming back on the bench, and specifically to do more of the difficult items. We're dealing with more or less the juvenile docket. I do some family law divorces, but mostly I do juvenile docket and a criminal docket, adult criminal docket. So that's where I am now, is on the juvenile. The docket's primarily the time consuming with that, and I can get into that a little later.
So what do you think is the biggest challenge with working with primarily juvenile individuals?
Quite honestly, the biggest challenge is trying to reunify the children with their parents.
Okay.
It's 90%, no, 85% of my juveniles, it's not because of their conduct that they're within the court system,
Sure.
that they're under my care. And I say my care, I'm the one that if they have a medical problem, a serious medical issue, I have to sign the orders. They want to travel to stay, I sign the orders. I'm the one that looks at the grades. But it's the parents. Most of the parents of these they have poverty issues.
Sure.
They don't have stable housing.
Sure.
They're living place to place, and a vast majority of those parents, it's drug addiction.
Okay.
That's the struggle, is to really get the parents on the right path and then get them the employment so we can reunify their children with them, because that's the first obligation of the court system in any state, I would imagine, is reunifying. Once a child is taken out of care, is to reunify the child with their parent. And when we take a child out of care, we don't necessarily put them in foster home right away at all. We look for relative care.
Sure.
Maybe a sister, maybe a grandparent, if they're suitable, that type of thing, and that type of family member. And we have a lot of aunts and uncles that are that. So when we say foster care, they're under the care of the Children's Division, but a lot of times they're placed in relative care under the Children's Division supervision and my supervision.
And I'd imagine, because like you say, you're a small town guy, I imagine you're interacting with these folks pretty regularly, like in supermarket,
Right.
so, wherever.
Yeah, I cover 2 counties, and
Okay.
so I'm in the 2 counties, but you're correct. Honestly, they tend to know me more than I know them, because I've got so many parents, but I recognize, I have hearings daily sometimes, but for sure weekly, and we're mandated to have hearings on a 30, 60, 120-day basis. So it's a little different seeing them on Zoom now as in live. You can say, well, it's the same, but you see their picture, but you don't get the full effect of them being in 3D out in front of you.
Yeah.
But the basis of Zoom is sometimes the children are placed in relative care or foster care, and they're not within the area. So it was always difficult to have whoever is providing the care come drive to court for the hearings.
Yeah.
Well, now they can appear on Zoom, and we can check in on Zoom, and that's made it so much better. And I won't go back to live hearings for one of that reasons is we have to have our contested hearings at the start by Supreme Court cases, because it's adjudications at the start in person, because everyone has a right to confront their witnesses. But after that, it's strictly the review hearings. All of them are review hearings. We can do I say Zoom. The state of Missouri uses WebEx. I was talking to a trustee about that yesterday. He goes, "What's WebEx?" I said, "It's another company's system," and the state of Missouri deemed it was probably a contract basis. But we started out with Zoom, but we've moved to WebEx.
How has your experience, working with families shaped your goals and plans for your time as the chair of the ACCT Board of Directors?
Well, I'm hoping it puts an emphasis on the families. I'm hoping it puts an emphasis on the single or dual parents, that we need to help them. And I think we're hearing some of the messages to that effect. Here this week, if you listen to First Lady Dr. Biden, if you listen to Secretary of Education, everyone realizes it's not just the students, but it's the families. And when I talk about the foster children, so I'm looking at the family members of younger children. How do we get them on track? How can we help them with short-term credentials or are the Pell Grants. And then as the kids themselves get to be 17 and they're juniors or seniors, I'm putting an emphasis that they should be guided by their counselor and their foster parents. And I question these foster parents or relative care. I said, have you all talked to the school counselor? Have they explained where you're going to go to school? Missouri, we do have what's called A+, and it is basically free tuition. Okay. If you qualify. You just real briefly, you have to have a 90% attendance for your 4 years. You have to have a 2.75 grade average, and you have to do 50 hours of community service. Okay. And almost every school now, if not every school, is an A+ a school system. Okay. I'm not sure everyone, because there are certain qualifications. But that way, when that happens, then those people. So I mean, just because you're in relative care or foster care doesn't mean you're not a good student at all. And I don't want people to think that. They're again, predominantly, today I was asked, how many of your students or how many of your, quote, children are delinquents? They don't go to school, they didn't want to go to school, they've been having problems. And I say maybe 15%. 85% of these kids are in care, but not what they've done, but because of what their parents have done. But these kids also, a lot of them have mental health needs. I was talking to Vernon Young. Yeah. And Vernon and I have had discussions, and I brought it up at the board meeting, and he gave a great message to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, the DEI committee the other day. And some of these, I've got, I always say lots, I've got several of these children with mental health needs. Their parents may have had mental health. These kids have mental health needs, and we're trying to do that. So I've told we kind of focus together on mental health needs, not only children but students. I mean, the students that I have in the state of Missouri, we keep children or keep kids through 20 years of age. We can keep them in care. Okay. And we can provide that college. We can provide that college, that community college tuition for them and their keep. So it kind of all runs together here between community colleges and what I do.
Yeah, I mean, we know that there's no single type of person that attends community college. It's, people from all walks of life. And I think it's easy, well, maybe not for the people attending this conference, but it's easy for some people to think, these are people who graduate high school and, they have nice stable backgrounds. Why can't they get to class? But there's really, there's all sorts of things going on behind the scenes for these families, these kids or adults that I think, I'm excited that we're going to be talking about more this year. So we have our annual Congress coming up, and what you've just spoken about is integral to the theme. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Well, they asked me to come up with a theme, and it's hard to come up with a theme you want. And so I came up with a basic idea, and to ACCT's credit, we put one together, improving the lives of entire families. Yep. So we're just not concentrating again on if you're just dealing with 17 and 18-year-olds, the foster children, but we're also dealing with the parents. And community colleges can, as I've just explained can improve the lives of entire families. Because if you could get, and as the Secretary of Labor today, if you can get the family, the parents involved in the community colleges, if you can get them involved, then they're working and getting short-term credentials, trades, etc., or full degrees, then that's going to improve their lives.
Thanks for listening to this episode of In the Know. We're really looking forward to Congress in New York City this year. Registration is now open, as is the call for presentations. We hope to see you in the Big Apple this October.